Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I have the Jane Austen Heroes book tag. I think that's what it's called. I think it's what, let's just check. I should have checked before I started, but hey, so this is called the Jane Austen Heroes tag. I was tagged by Emily of Novel Novels. There's a whole reason why Emily decided to tag me in this. And this is because sometimes Emily likes to be mischievous. And last year, I basically tagged her a lot. And if you didn't know, Emily has videos planned months in advance. So you can tag her in June and she's not going to get it until about September 2023 when she's finally found the time. So, Emily is now getting her own back and tagging me in this tag because she knows that I don't get on with Jane Austen and she thinks she can have a bit of devilment. Well, finally, 2 weeks after being tagged, I'm getting around to this. So, firstly, we have the question, Mr. Darcy, pick a book you thought you wouldn't like but ended up loving. The Lollipop Shoes by Joanne Harris. I mentioned this book a lot. I'd apologise, but Joanne Harris is basically my favourite author writing at this time, so I'm not going to do that. My mother bought this book for me in 2007. I'd asked for Rune Marks, which was her first young adult book, for Christmas, and seeing this book had been written by the same author, my mum bought it for me. I thought that this book was women's fiction and that I wouldn't enjoy it, and I ended up just opening it one day whilst waiting for the toilet and read the first line. It is a relatively little known fact that over the course of a single year, about 20 million letters are delivered to the dead. I was hooked. I read this book a lot that following year. Joanne Harris went on to become one of my favourite writers, and yet I had basically held this rather misogynistic view about certain types of literature just because of what I've been taught about certain types of literature by not only school but by society. Then we have 2, Mr. Collins, pick a book you said nope to, did not finish. The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I mentioned this book because it sold this morning. I tried reading this book in December 2019 and it was boring me. It took me ages to try and get through it. The idea of picking it up felt like a strain, and so I just closed the book after about 2 weeks of trying to read it. And last week I put it on eBay and this morning it sold and made me a bit of money, so I'm happy about that. I feel like I have been given my hours back. Paid for the hours lost with that darn book. 3, Whickham, pick a book with a misleading cover. A Wreath of Roses by Elizabeth Taylor. I don't know whether you can see this cover properly, but it looks somewhat whimsical, doesn't it? And I'm finding that with all these Virago modern classics of Elizabeth Taylor's books, whilst they are stunning covers, and I'm happy to have them on my shelves, and I keep admiring them as the physical object as well, the text is rather big. I admire everything about the way that these books have been created, but you feel it, to me this cover seems quite whimsical, like I'm going to be getting some sort of pastoral novel that's going to deal with, as I say, whimsy and a certain period in the 1950s. This book is dark and this book is claustrophobic, and that is not what I got from this cover. It's an amazing book and cemented for me the fact that I think that Elizabeth Taylor is going to be one of my favourite writers, and I can't wait to explore more of her work thoroughly. But these covers definitely don't tell the reader what is going on within the pages. 4, Mr. Knightley, pick a childhood favourite that has stuck with you through thick and thin. I was really trying to come up with something here, but as I talk about all the time, I didn't really have many books as a child, and most of the books that were favourites as a child are no longer a favourite now. I did consider picking up A Christmas Carol, but whilst I enjoy the adaptations of that, and have always watched that since being a very young age indeed, I didn't actually read the book until I was 16, so unfortunately there are none. My childhood has long since passed. It's historical, it's antique, and it's full of tales never to be told. 5, Edward Ferrars. Pick a book that keeps coming back to your mind that you can't stop thinking about. Since I read this book in 2017, it has stuck with me, and that is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. I would find this 800-page tome, but it would mean taking apart my shelves to show it. When I was about 14, my dad got into watching the miniseries when he was going through chemotherapy, and we watched it as a family, and it's something that always stuck in my mind as something that I wanted to read. And when I started it, I thought I was going to be somewhat bored by the story. It took me a very long time to get through the first 180 pages of part 1. But once I reached part 2, the book starts moving along. It gains new speed, and there's more there's more philosophy in there, there's more humour. I began to feel so much more for the characters, and there are certain scenes that I will be thinking about in terms of writing and in terms of great writing that I will think about, and sometimes they'll bring a smile to my face and sometimes they'll just get me thinking about the human condition, and that all comes from Lonesome Dove. And even though it's now nearly 4 years since I read it and I really want to read the prequels and the sequels, that book always comes back to me, and I can so vividly imagine scenes from that book. Next we have 6, Willoughby. Pick a book that sounded so good but ended up disappointing you. I really couldn't think of one for this. I think if I went back through my videos, I'd be able to find one, because it does happen quite often that I end up disappointed by books. I suppose I could say Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens, because that was one I'd really been looking forward to, because I think it's Katie of Books and Things' second favourite, which is what got me to read that book. And I just found the process of reading it a bit boring, and then I switched to listening to it on audiobook, and I just really did not like Dombey and Son. I don't know what it was specifically, but yeah, it was not what I'd hoped for, and yeah, it did not give me, it did not feel as magnificent as some of Dickens' other works. And then we have 7, Captain Wentworth. Pick an underrated book that deserves more love. I would go in search of this book, but unfortunately there is loads of stuff in front of my shelves at the moment that means I cannot. That is The Tower Hill Terror by Dane Cobain of Dane Reads. This book was released in April last year, and as such did not get the recognition that it deserves. It is the second book in the Lightfold series and follows Lightfold and Miley as they go in search of a serial killer. There is some body horror within this book, but once again Dane does what Dane does well, and that is take tropes from the classic age of, the golden age of crime fiction, blends it with the modern day exceptionally well to create a narrative with very strong sleuths at the core. So yeah, that one. If you haven't read the first book, Driven, then that does the same, and is perhaps my favourite over this, but The Tower Hill Terror, definitely underrated and didn't get the recognition it deserved last year. So, there we go. I'm not tagging anyone, because as I keep saying, in all these tags I've recorded today, I can't be bothered. But if you do fancy doing this tag, maybe you're a fan of Jane Austen and want to have a bash, then feel free. I always leave the prompts in the description. If you've read any of the books I've mentioned and would like to discuss them, then please feel free to do so in the comments. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.